Hi guys, welcome to Mrs. B Teaches English. Today we are looking at the poem Funeral Blues by W.H. Auden. So before we look at the poet, I want us to read through the poem together. He says, "Stop all the clocks, cut off the telephone, prevent the dog from barking with a juicy bone, silence the pianos and with muffled drum, bring out the coffin, let the mourners come. Let airplanes circle moaning overhead, scribbling in the sky the message, he is dead. Put crape bows round the white necks of public doves. Let the traffic policemen wear black cotton gloves. He was my north, my south, my east and west, my working week and my Sunday rest, my noon, my midnight, my talk, my song. I thought that love would last forever. I was wrong. The stars are not wanted now. Put out every one. Pack up the moon and dismantle the sun. Pour away the ocean and sweep up the wood, for nothing now can ever come to any good." So we have this unnamed speaker that is lamenting the death of someone close to him. The speaker's gender is never given, but we'll refer to a him from now on, for the sake of convenience and also because of the strong rumors that this was a very personal poem for Auden. The speaker asks for quiet. He wants to stop all the clocks and telephones and to silence barking dogs and pianos. He says to bring out the coffin and the dead beloved and for the mourners to come. He continues in this very similar vein and asks the airplanes to write "He is dead" across the sky. He says that the doves should wear white ribbons and that policemen should wear black gloves to commemorate the death. Then things take a turn for the personal. He says that the dead man was everything to him, all points of a compass, every day of the week, every time of the day. And the worst part is that this experience has taught him that love won't last forever as he once thought. That's when he starts to really despair. He doesn't want to see the stars, the moon, or the sun. He doesn't want to see the ocean or the forest. Now that the dead man is gone, there is no good left in the world, none at all. So let's go to the poets. W.H. Auden, very celebrated poet, known as Waston Hugh Auden, one of the most influential English poets of the 20th century. He went to Oxford University to study science, but soon switched to a degree in English. Then we see he's influenced by some socialist ideas. He traveled to Spain to even support the Spanish Civil War, even though he has absolutely zero Spanish heritage. We then see he immigrated to the US before the Second World War and met the love of his life. His poetry is noted for its variety of tone and form and content, but we see that central themes of his poetry are love, religion, and morals, and the relationship between unique human beings and the world of nature. So, a summary of this poem, we already discussed it. It's really that the speaker expresses his overpowering feelings of grief at the death of his loved one, and that he feels that there should be a dramatic display of mourning. Black bows on the necks of doves, and policemen should wear cotton gloves. And he describes how important this beloved was to him. He assumed that their love would last forever, and then he realized, but it won't. So this poem ends with an almost apocalyptic desire to pack away the entire world because he feels that without his loved one, nothing good will ever happen. If we look at the type and the form here, it's an elegiac poem, it's an elegy, a mournful funeral poem for someone who has died. Then we notice there's a very rigid 4-stanza 4-line structure, consistent rhyme scheme A, A, B, B, C, C, D, D, so there's that pair rhyme throughout. Usually elegies have a very slow pace, but this poem, I am sure you noticed, has a fast pace. It's almost like the speaker is rushing to say every single thing that he feels before time runs out, because he realizes that it's the end, and he wishes perhaps that he could have said all of these things to the person, how much he meant to him before he passed away, until the pace slows down towards the end, when we really see that sadness coming through. So the title, Funeral Blues. Blues, we know, is a genre of music which arose from songs that were sung by the slaves, so sad songs. The word blues here, very ambiguous. Blue is also a color associated with being sad. And like I said, it's an American word for a sad song. So features of these blues songs are that they are slow and reflective in their melodies and lyrics, and that it's often about the sorrows of life, suffering. Then a funeral, of course, a very public event. Auden wants the world to be aware of this death. So the title is a reference to the sadness of the poem and also the elegy, the song of grief. It's really set in a very somber tone already in the title. Then significant themes, we see there's more than one. The first one is grief and mourning. So someone whom the speaker really loves deeply passed away, and the speaker issues the series of commands that calls for time to stop and telephones, dogs and pianos to be silenced. The public must show signs of mourning, and even the natural world must come to an end. All that must be left is the silence, in silence is the speaker's grief. So it's pretty much all out there in the title already. It's a poem about death. Terrible, horrible, no good, very bad death. After the death of his loved one, the speaker has no joy or hope. He's completely and utterly devastated. There's no silver lining in this poem, no happy endings, no smiles or songs. There's only the notion that death is the pits, and that not just for the dead, but also for the living, perhaps even more for the living. Then there's theme of private versus public mourning. Although losing a loved one is really a very personal thing, and we usually mourn very privately, the speaker here makes the demands that even the public should come and acknowledge that this very important person has passed away. Then the bereaved and the natural world. The speaker is so devastated by the death of his loved one that he wants the known world to end. It's almost like he says, let's pack up the whole universe. It's not of any use now, so we might as well just end the world right here. This could be so that everyone can understand that the speaker is going through a lot of pain, and because the speaker cannot bear to be reminded of all the world's beauty during this time of mourning, because he cannot share it with his loved one. Then, of course, this is a poem about love. The speaker's love for the deceased was immense, and the deceased filled every aspect of the speaker's life, so much so that his death has left a devastating void that nothing can ever fill, according to the speaker. So we see in this poem the loss of a love is really final. So just to look at the poem in general, we see that he's using a lot of imperative verbs there: stop, cut, prevent, silence, bring out, and this really highlights the speaker's experience of grief. It is almost like he wants to take control in some way, and he's doing it by issuing all of these commands. And he really wants life to stop interrupting his mourning. Then what we notice is in the first stanza there's a lot of private grief, right? It happens at the home, so stopping the clocks, cutting off the telephone, the dog that you want to prevent from barking, and then he's talking about the mourners. This now moves on to signs of public grief. The airplanes that are moaning overhead, and the crepe bows that he wants to put around the necks of the doves, and the black cotton gloves on the policemen. Those are all public signs of grief, and also somewhat absurd because we cannot catch all of the doves or have all of the policemen wear black cotton gloves and write in the sky, "He is dead." It's really a little bit exaggerated, but perhaps displaying how immense his grief is. Then, stanza 3, we see the repetition of the possessive pronouns: my north, my south, my east, my working week, my Sunday rest, my noon, my talk. This really indicates that his loss is so tangible. And it makes us wonder, is this the loss of a friend, or perhaps just someone that was more than a friend? Again, we return to, with all the flippant imperatives there: pack up the moon, dismantle the sun, pour away, and sweep up. Those are all associated with some form of romantic image. If you think of nature, you want to look at the moon together and you're reminded of the stars, and you compare people to these wonderful things, and you want to sit on the beach together and watch the sunset. Romantic ideas. And he feels that all of these romantic images are now useless because he has nobody to share them with. So it really ends on an emotional, hopeless note at the end. Right, so let's jump into the line-by-line analysis. Stanza 1. Stop all the clocks, cut off the telephone, prevent the dog from barking with a juicy bone. Silence the pianos, and with muffled drum, bring out the coffin. Let the mourners come. So, stopping the clocks and cutting off the telephone, really, number 1 we said is imperative verbs. Stop, cut, prevent, silence, bring out, and let. The speaker is making this big pronouncement to the world. Someone has died, and we must acknowledge it in very dramatic ways. Stopping clocks, cutting off the telephone, really ancient customs. As soon as a person dies, the clock should be stopped, and we cut off the telephone because everyone wants to mourn in private. They don't want to be disturbed. And the significance of stopping the clocks can also be that it's signaling the end of time for the deceased. It was a way in which to mark the exact time that that person passed away, so that the mourners could be informed when they arrived at the house to mourn for the dead. Silence is a very strong element throughout the poem. He desperately wishes for silence and for time to stop or stand still to allow him to mourn. So he really just wishes that everyday life would stop interrupting his mourning. Like we said, old mourning customs of the 19th century. This is most certainly a hyperbole. It's an exaggeration of what he wants. And we see that all of these harsh, forceful comments is because the speaker is angry and he just wants to have some control over the matter. So there's a very strong desire for silence, even in his expression when he says, prevent the dog from barking. Dogs who often bark during play must be quieted. Why? Because the speaker does not feel playful. This juicy bone will silence the dog. So there you go, dog, have a bone and shush, because we want to mourn. He wants the world to acknowledge this death with respect and absolute silence. Not even the music from a piano can be appreciated. And perhaps also because pianos are associated with more romantic music. The only sound the speaker wants to hear is the somber beat of the muffled drum as the funeral procession begins. Only after these careful preparations have been complete can the coffin be brought out and the mourners allowed to arrive. The speaker wants to focus on the deceased for proper mourning. So, of course, you notice the alliteration of the nasal M sounds, muffled and mourner, and this shows that he's perhaps trying to stifle his tears, that sound that people make right before they start crying. That's what it mimics here. Then we move on to stanza 2. Now we're moving from the private shows of grief to the more public show. Let the airplanes circle, moaning overhead, scribbling on the sky the message, he is dead. put crape bows around the white necks of public doves. Let the traffic policemen wear black cotton gloves. So, again, we said this is now moving to a more public show of grief. The airplanes moaning overhead, there's a strong sense of personification here. The sound of the airplanes are reminding us of the actual moaning sound that the mourners make when they cry, and also that the airplanes make as they are circling. So this is a complete contradiction to stanza 1, where the speaker just wants to mourn privately and wants to be left alone with his grief. Then very significant is that in line 6 we see he says, scribbling on the sky the message, "He is dead," and the "he" is written with a capital H. The capital really emphasizes the importance of this deceased person. He was very important, and therefore he wants this name to be written with an H, with a capital H. There's no name given, and that is because he wants privacy, or because he assumes that everyone already knows. So it's either because he doesn't want anybody to know who this person really was, or because he assumes every single person already knows who he's referring to. Then line 7, put crape bows around the white necks of public doves. The crape bows denote that the doves have been decorated in a show of mourning. They are public doves because they are the doves or pigeons which frequent the public places like parks or city squares. This really emphasizes that he wants a public show of grief. And then line 8, let the traffic policemen wear black cotton gloves. Usually traffic policemen wear white gloves. Black is a sign of mourning, so this really intensifies the poet's desire for the public to acknowledge his death. In terms of tone, in the first 2 stanzas, we can say that he's very commanding and forceful. The speaker uses these imperative verbs like stop and let and put to command the people to pay attention to the deceased. Moving on to stanza 3, we now move to what this person really meant to the speaker. He was my north, my south, my east, my west. So the poet lists a number of ways in which the deceased belonged to him. This indicates that he was really everything to him, and it's very important that you will be able to identify and explain all of these metaphors. So in the first line of stanza 3, he was my north, my south, my east, my west. There's a metaphor here. The deceased is being compared to a compass. So the person's presence in his life gave him direction and stability. This whole stanza really has a very intimate tone. Then my working week and my Sunday rest. Again, we have a metaphor here for a calendar. Their love filled every day of the week and all the hours of the day. We also notice that there's a complete contrast here, working and rest. So he was an integral part of every moment of the speaker's daily life and perhaps gave him some balance. Then my noon, my midnight, my talk, my song, a metaphor for time. They seemed to be a perfect match, sharing everything together. They were inseparable. So he also defined the poet's sense of time. In terms of my talk and my song, he influenced the speaker's communication and mood. These lines really suggest that he was, in fact, the speaker's whole life. Then the final line of the stanza expresses the genuine sorrow that the speaker experiences over his loss and points to a growing sense of disillusionment. The speaker had previously believed that love would be eternal, but now admits, I was wrong. His beloved has died, and this marked the end of love. he has great difficulty in accepting this loss. And we see this is really emphasized through the use of the colon here. After, I thought love would last forever, colon, and then comes this sense of an admission. I was wrong. Then, of course, we spoke about the repetition of the personal pronoun my. This really indicates how important the deceased was to the poet. So the tone in the third stanza is somewhat nostalgic. He's thinking back and remembers what it was like when the deceased was alive. This last line, very harsh. It's a harsh reality that loved ones will die and no love then lasts forever. Moving on to the fourth stanza, back up the moon, or the stars are not wanted now, put out everyone, pack up the moon and dismantle the sun, pour away the ocean and sweep up the wood, for nothing now can ever come to any good. Lines 13 and 14, the stars are not wanted now, put out everyone. The poet returns to this earlier commanding or imperative tone, and we also see that he becomes somewhat distant. And we again have hyperbole. There's an extreme exaggeration here because we cannot actually pack up the stars and the moon and pour away the ocean. It's absolutely impossible. But it really shows us that he's growing even more depressed. His grief is so extreme that he wants to affect the whole cosmos with it. The poet singles out all these things in nature which are symbols of love, the moon, the stars, the sun. With death, however, it comes to an end, and therefore there's no longer any point to the stars. His beloved has died, so to have the moon and the stars, figuratively. Back up the moon, dismantle the sun. So no, not even the wonders of nature can console him. Pour away the ocean, sweep up the wood. He wants them to be replaced by darkness and sorrow. The world will be plunged into total darkness, and that darkness would suit the depressed mood of the poet. The ocean and the wood here represents the land and the sea. He wants it all to disappear. He wants the world to come to an end because his world has ended. So the hyperbole here really indicates the absolute depths of the poet's sorrow, his intense grief and despair. He is feeling totally hopeless, for nothing now can ever come to any good. So again, we have a metaphor here. The physical elements of the universe are being compared to unwanted household items. So the stars and the moon, the sun, the ocean, it's all being compared to household items that we can sweep away or pack away. And he feels that nothing is of value now that he has lost his loved one. The tone of this final stanza is forceful and even irrational and cynical. The speaker requests these outlandish tasks to be performed, and we know that he feels that nothing now can ever come to any good. It cannot change. Again, we're saying this is an elegy, and usually an elegy has some form of hope for the future at the end. So there's something optimistic, like they're going to a better place, they're going to heaven, their grief and pain is now gone for the deceased, but not this poem. There is no light at the end of the tunnel for this speaker. And that really concludes our discussion of funeral blues. I hope this will help you in studying for the exam.